Oh, all the silly stuff we do just so we can video things. Whatever. I'm probably going to cut this out anyway. Hello and welcome to Mountaincoffee Outdoors. I'm Gareth. Back in October when I did my Alone in the Elk Range 10-item survival challenge, and while I was editing the videos and uploading them to YouTube, at one point in time I realized that I probably should sit down kind of after the fact and make a video where I talk about that experience and what I learned with it. So here you go. I had written down some notes, which are at home, of course, so I'm just doing this off the top of my head, so hopefully I don't miss too much anyway of some of the things. But anyway, here we are. It's March now, so it's been a while since October. I finally got all the Alone in the Elk Range episodes uploaded by early January, if I remember right. But I never did sit down and do my video where I just kind of shared my thoughts about the whole thing. So here you go. Yeah, that survival challenge was a very, very, very neat experience. I'm very glad I did it. I had been looking forward to that, and I'd been planning it out since sometime that June, I think. And it was about the time that the fifth season of Alone, the Mongolia season, was on TV that idea occurred to me to try to do that. But I looked forward to that experience, that challenge for months. Finally, late October came. I went out, I did it, and I'm sure you could tell if you've watched the last episode of the Alone at the Elk Range videos series, because I'm sure you could tell if you watched the final video in the Alone at the Elk Range series how much that meant to me, because I'm sitting there talking about how I'm made the decision to hike out the day earlier because I was so worried about what the weather was going to do, and I got a little bit emotional, I guess you'd say, on that, just because it meant a lot to me. It really did. And it was kind of closing the book on that chapter. But that was a very interesting experience. It was very interesting for me personally, just learning certain things about myself and kind of, I think, about humans in general. It was very interesting because now, whenever I watch Alone in the future, or rewatch old episodes, which I've pretty much rewatched every season except the latest one, the Mongolia one. Going out there and doing something like that gives you a different perspective on what those contestants actually have to deal with in some ways. Because unless you've actually gone out and been by yourself, out in the wilderness, cut off from other people where you don't see anybody, and just have to sit there and just fill days, just do something to fill up that amount of space. You just don't quite understand what or you don't have quite that same insight as to what the contestants on Alone are doing. I'm not saying that I, know what it was like to be on Alone. I've never done that. That actual, and haven't ever been through that experience itself. I've done my own thing, which was inspired by Alone, yes, but it was still different. For one thing, it was a lot shorter than what a lot of the folks on Alone stay out there. Although I have to say, I lasted longer than some. I did last longer than some of the contestants on Alone have, doing my thing. not to knock anybody. I just think I think it is actually kind of funny, I guess, that I did outlast some of them. But and I had bear tracks around, where I was at and stuff. So, there's stuff that might have freaked people out where I was at. But one of kind of the biggest underlying things that I learned during that experience is how human beings really aren't meant to be alone. That is, it says right in, within the first chapters in the book of Genesis, it is not good for man to be alone. And I think that is very true in more than one way. And one of the ways I think it's true is that, we're just not good at being all by ourselves. We need companionship. For a long time I thought I was good at just kind of doing my own thing, and because I'd gone out and done a lot of solo stuff, but it's hard on you. It's hard on you. It doesn't sit well with you being all by yourself. If you have a dog or something, that's companionship. It's not necessarily completely human companionship, but even that, even if you have like canine companionship, I'm sure that after a while you still crave human companionship also. But that just being alone, being isolated is hard. Is hard on you in a way that you just don't really understand until you've done it. It's just humans aren't meant to be alone. It is rough on you. And, even in my experience, I actually had a couple people happen by, and those hunters from Tennessee that I talked with, a couple of them. And, you can tell on the video how before they come up to the lake, I was just kind of, I don't necessarily want to say humdrum, but I was just kind of or I don't want to say I was moping around, but, I was kind of lesser versions of both of those things. I was just kind of hanging out in my camp. I'd already cut all the firewood I needed to cut, I was just kind of spending time, kicking back a little bit, just trying not to, just burn up extra energy I didn't need to. And, I was just kind of existing up there at that point in time. And then when those guys came by and I talked to them, which, I never got that on camera. But after I talked to them, I, shot some video of me saying how they just come up there, and you can tell that my spirits had been lifted. I had a more kind of optimistic outlook on like the next couple of days. I had more energy. It really pepped me up. It's clear as day. Talking to those guys really, really pepped me up. It made a difference. You can tell that on the videos. The people on alone, they're out there by themselves for, sometimes, a few months on end. And, they do see some people when the producers come and they like change out their camera equipment, give them new batteries, take their old SD cards, stuff like that. I know that they see them, but I know that they really keep that interaction to a minimum. But even so, I know that based on what somebody has told me that was on alone, that they really look forward to those days when they even that little bit of interaction, which isn't even much, they really look forward to those because of the fact they get to at least see somebody. But man, to be out there by yourself for as long as they do, that's hard. Another thing that was very interesting that I learned from doing that survival challenge was it really gives you a unique perspective on what the contestants on Alone go through. And like I said, I don't know exactly what they went through because I've not done the same thing that they did on the show, but I've done something that was similar in a lot of ways. And it's one of those things. Unless you go out and you kind of exist that way for a while, you really can't completely understand kind of what they go through in some ways. When the contestants are out there I was only out for 4 days. Some of the alone contestants were out there for several months. And Fowler and Carly were out for, I can't remember, I almost want to say it was close to 3 months, better part of 3 months or something like that. But when you're out like that, when you're out in the wilderness by yourself, you just have to like pass the days somehow. And yeah, I mean, there's stuff you have to do. But even after you've collected all the wood you need to collect, and boiled all the water you need to boil, and you do all that stuff, you still have all this time on your hands that you just have to fill somehow. And yeah, on alone, they also have to go out and try to fish, gather food, set traps, things like that. I didn't have to do that for my challenge because I brought what little food I ate, I brought with me out there, just because of the conditions of where I was going that time of year. It was basically early winter up there already, and the lake was frozen with a small, thin layer of ice, so I couldn't fish it from the shore. I couldn't ice fish. Wild edibles were, I'm not sure there's ever very many up in that environment to begin with. And then with all the snow on the ground, you couldn't really find much of anything. The spruce tip tea was about as much of wild edibles as I ever got up there. But, on alone, they have to spend time trying to hunt, trap, fish, that sort of thing, gather. So that would be helpful for them to keep them occupied in that way. But, when I was out there, it was just the idea of like another day coming that I would just have to be out there all by myself and I'd have to fill somehow. It was kind of it was a daunting thing. And I remember thinking, like, how do they do this for like a month or 2 months or, 2.5 months, almost 3 months? It's just, it's tough. It's tough on you. I could see why people would just tap out just because of that. And like I said, when I was out in Colorado, more than once on alone, I've heard people say, they decide to tap out and they say, I've come out here to do what I was going to do. I've accomplished that, and it's time to basically tap out and move on. And watching the show, whenever they say that, it's kind of like, what do you mean you've already accomplished what you came out here to accomplish? It's like, you win $500,000 if you are the last person out. It's like, stay, don't tap out. But I understand that, oddly, because I don't know, and it's hard to describe. You go out there, you have your reasons for going out there. And obviously for me, none of it ever had anything to do with money because nobody was going to pay me anything. But by the end of it, I had accomplished what I went out there to accomplish. I don't know. It's one of those things you just really can't explain. But I think a lot of those people, I guess there's two ways to look at it alone. You can either, one, kind of focus on the money, or you can kind of forget about the money. And I think a lot of those people, even though they want to win the money, I think for a lot of people, it's probably not as much about the money as you would think. It becomes this kind of balancing act between, feeling so alone, maybe kind of getting bored about doing the same stuff and just having to fill hours during the day, and then, just kind of maybe not being that worried about the money to begin with in certain ways, even though I'm sure you want to win it. But I can see why people, can kind of say, yep, I've accomplished what I came to accomplish, and it's time to go, because I felt that way when I was up in Colorado. A thing that I thought was really neat about my experience while I was out doing my survival challenge was how I felt, anyway, that while I was out there up at that lake, I kind of, I was out in the wilderness, and I kind of felt like I became part of the wilderness while I was out there. Because we humans, modern day humans, we have this kind of world we've created for ourselves. We have this like time schedule that we govern ourselves by, like when we get up, when we eat, when we go to work, when we eat lunch, when we come home, all that stuff. When we watch TV shows, whatever. But out there, really my only clock was the sun. Was the sun and the stars, really. You just have to kind of attune yourself to the rhythm and the timeline of nature. And I just kind of felt like I was as much a resident and part of the wilderness up there as the birds that I could hear chirping in the trees, as the bear that left the prints in the snow up there. I just felt like I was a part of it. I didn't really feel as much that I was like an intruder or a visitor, I guess. I kind of felt like I was just part of it while I was up there. And I didn't really, I don't know, never really felt all that worried about the bear that was around there somewhere, or, potentially a mountain lion, because I had found mountain lion tracks up at that same lake 10 years before when I was up there. I didn't really worry about that stuff. And it's not that this dumb idea that I'm like a part of this nature, nature. I'm part of nature up here, and nature is not going to hurt me. It wasn't something like that. I knew that potentially there could be danger involved from animals, or potentially, the weather. If I wasn't prepared, the weather could have caused me a lot of problems. But I felt, I don't know, being up there, with the clothing and the equipment I had with me, I felt that, and my skill set to take that tarp and to make a shelter that would work, that would keep the the snow off of me and stuff like that. I didn't really feel worried about stuff. About the only thing I felt worried about was having to carry that pack that weighed a ton back out. That was something that I did worry about. But they really didn't have anything about being there necessarily. But yeah, when I was up there in the dark with just my campfire to give me light, I don't know, I wasn't afraid. I don't know, I just felt like I was a part of it. And yeah, there's kind of that unknown back in the darkness of the woods and all that when you're up there, but I don't know, it just didn't really bother me. I just kind of felt like I was there, I was a part of it, and I don't know. Maybe I'm just crazy like that, I don't know. But one thing, when it comes to having to attune yourself to the rhythm and the timeline of nature, was that, there were some nights where I didn't really sleep quite as well as maybe I would have liked, or as long as I would have liked, because I would kind of wake up and the sun wasn't up, so I just knew, like, no reason getting up, just lay in the sleeping bag, try to go back to sleep, and I don't know, I guess sometimes I probably did, and sometimes I didn't do so good a job about falling asleep, but sometimes you just, you wouldn't sleep quite as long as you kind of would like to, and it's probably because I was going to sleep earlier than I probably usually do at home, I'm sure, because, up there the sun was going down at, I don't know, like 6 or, it was probably dark by like 6:30, 7, something like that. There's only so much you want to do sitting in front of a campfire. I did plenty of that, but, just gets to where it's just better to go to sleep and cozy up in the sleeping bag. But it was kind of a neat feeling just to know that I could go somewhere with simple gear, land my 10 items plus my clothes basically, and survive, live, in an environment like that for a few days. And it wasn't that, overall that wasn't the easiest place to live necessarily. I mean, it was basically early winter up at an alpine lake at close, better part of 11,000 feet. And it snowed several times while I was up there. And yeah, it wasn't really the friendliest environment by any means, but yeah, I did just fine. And that's kind of a neat feeling to know that you can do that. It's not that I really had any question that I probably wouldn't do okay, but yeah, it's kind of a nice feeling to know that you've gone up there and done that. If I could go back and do it all again, which I'll be honest, what I probably, as I was out there, and maybe even as I was walking out, I probably wasn't thinking too much about going out and doing that sort of thing again, especially probably not while I was out there trying to figure out how I was going to spend these days, fill them up by doing something. But not long after that, I started really kind of having the desire to kind of go out and do something like that again. And yeah, if I were to do it again, would I change things? Well, something which I feel like would have to be changed was that pack weight. My pack, I'm not sure what that pack weighed. I'm just going to guess that maybe 80 pounds, somewhere around there. I don't know, maybe even more. I'm not really sure. It was very, very heavy. It was really rough for me to have to carry that pack up to that lake. Had that lake been any further away, I'm not sure I would have gone all the way to wherever that was. If I was trying to go somewhere that was further up than that lake was, I don't know if I would have made it to that imaginary, hypothetical place, because I really felt like I was about on my limit with what I did. And that hike turned out to be longer than I expected, because the road was, I couldn't drive up the road as I had in years past. So that added, I don't think it was quite 2 miles onto the hike one way. But it was at least 1.5 miles plus or so. Maybe it was close to 2, something like that, with some elevation gain on it too, because it was all uphill. And so the hike was longer than I expected. My pack weighed a ton. That was really rough. I really feel that if I were to do something like that in the future, where I would go out somewhere, and I would assume that if I did it again, it would be a similar thing where I'd have to hike somewhere to do it, that I wouldn't necessarily get dropped off somehow, because I don't know how that would be arranged, and it would not be cheap at all. And so anyway, if I go out and do this sort of thing again, I somehow have got to get the pack weight down, I would say considerably. A lot of that weight was, a lot of it was clothing. I did have a pretty big poly tarp, so the extra poly tarp material added some weight to it. I was carrying an axe. I was carrying a bear canister, which weighed a fair bit itself. I don't know, when you just add it all together, even though I only had 10 items plus clothes in my camera gear, it weighed a lot. So somehow I'd have to get that weight down. I don't know if some of the clothing things, I probably could have done without that Carhartt jacket I brought, which weighed a lot. Probably could have done without the wool sweater I brought, because I only wore it once or so. It was nice to have in case I needed it, but some of that stuff I probably could have picked some lighter weight options. But even with doing that, you'd still have a pack that weighed a lot. So that would take some doing. I would also have to come up with another place to do it. And yeah, it would be nice to do that sort of thing where I actually would have to try to get my own food out there. That would be a definitely more authentic type of experience than just bringing some frozen trout with you. But I thought, while I was up there, I don't think I ever saw any snowshoe hare tracks. I thought I probably would. I don't think I ever saw any, though. Because one thing I did think was maybe if I could snare a snowshoe hare or something like that, I could eat that. I looked into the hunting, trapping regulations, and as I understand, yes, I think that there is, there's like a season or something for snowshoe here. I don't know if I was in the season or not, but there is a way to do that legally. But had I just gone up there and tried snaring one, that wouldn't have been legal, and I didn't want to get in trouble, and I didn't want to, do things that aren't, you know, I just didn't want to violate the fishing game regulations. Obviously, if I was up there in a true like survival situation that I found myself in, yeah, shooting or snaring a rabbit, there's no problem in that at all. You just got to do what you got to do to get some food. But yeah, I didn't really think that I should. That it just wasn't really a legal option for me while I was up there. One last little thing about that trip, just in general, it was kind of interesting because I went out on that trip with, the main thing I was doing was going out and doing that 10 item survival challenge. But I don't think I have ever gone out on a trip by myself and wound up talking to more people over the course of the trip than I did on that trip. Because I hiked up, I was up at the lake, and then I talked to, briefly with with a few of those hunters from Tennessee. And then on the hike out, there was an outfitter camp right on the edge of the wilderness boundary, the designated wilderness boundary. And 10 years ago, when I'd gone by there at the same time of year, there wasn't anybody there. This time, as I walked by, I saw that there was somebody there, and they had some dogs and such. But so anyway, on the way out, I had that really big, was like 10 by 20 foot poly tarp, which I honestly have no use for something that big. And it was damp, and I was gonna have to somehow dry it out. And I don't have a place even around home to like lay that thing out and dry it out. So I didn't really know what to do with it. I actually kind of considered just burning the thing in the fire, but I knew that would, one, make a big mess, and I might not get everything burnt up, but I didn't even want to do that. But anyway, on the hike out, I thought, well, maybe I'll just see if anybody at that outfitter camp wants that tarp. So once I got down there, I walked over and said, hey, do you want a poly tarp? And they're like, yeah, sure. So I gave it to them, and I wound up staying there. They had a campfire going. What it was the guy that owns the outfitter business. It's a Capitol Peak Outfitters, I think. I can't remember his name. His name escapes me for right now. He invited me to come over, hang out by the fire. He had one of his clients up there with him, elk hunters. Can't remember where he was from. I want to say maybe like Illinois or somewhere. I can't remember. It was several states away from Colorado. But anyway, he offered me a Bud Light, and which tasted good after not having had anything like that for quite a while, for several days. But we wound up just sitting in front of this fire of aspen wood up in the Elk Range mountains of Colorado, and just, I don't know, I was probably there for, I would guess, it seemed like a couple hours talking. It was at least probably an hour and a half, if not longer. Just talking about stories of like elk hunting, and back in, him getting in trouble a little bit back in his rodeo days up in Canada. It was some really neat conversation. Just hanging out with a couple guys around a campfire up in Colorado. It was awesome. It was just good to be with people and talk, and talked a lot about how dry it had been up in the mountains in Colorado last summer, spring, summer, fall. I think the whole thing was pretty dry up until about the time I got there, which it kind of turned into a bit of a mess because it started snowing and raining finally. But yeah, after talking with them for quite a while, I mean, at that point in time, I wasn't even probably halfway down to back where the truck was parked. So I figured I'd kind of needed to get a move on so I could get down and call Alicia, my wife, let her know I was safe and sound and had survived. But as I was getting ready to go, the outfitter, he he invited me to stick around for supper. He said they were going to have chili, and it was so hard for me to decide to still walk out and not stay for that chili, because having a chili dinner at an outfitter's camp up in the Elk Range of Colorado amongst the aspen trees and everything, I mean, that would just be, and to do it for free, I mean, that's just that would just have been such a cool little meal to have. But I decided I was afraid that if I did that, I wouldn't get out that night to where I could get cell phone coverage to call Alicia. So that's the main reason I didn't. Now when I look back on it, it's almost like, well, could you have stayed for supper and then hiked out in the dark and still called her and all that? You kind of second guess yourself and all that. But anyway, I gave up that opportunity to have a chili dinner up there at this outfitter camp, just so I could tell Alicia a little bit sooner that I was out. But anyway, and he actually let me know a little shortcut that you didn't have to follow the road all the way down. It just kind of took a straighter course. So that saved me some time hiking out. And then part of the way down, there was a guy and his son, which I believe they were elk hunters, because they were out just kind of looking around, glassing the distant slopes, looking for elk. I'm pretty sure they were elk they were looking for, because they passed me on the road going up, and then on the way down, they asked me if I wanted to ride, and I said sure. I threw my pack, jumped in the back of the truck, and they drove me down to where the truck was at. And the next day, there were a group of 3 guys from Pennsylvania. It was a guy, his son, and his nephew. They were out elk hunting, and they were camped at that trailhead parking lot where I was at, where I spent the night. And that next morning, I started talking to the dad, and he invited me over, and I basically spent the morning talking with those guys. We had some sausage and some food, and just talked for basically the whole morning with those guys in front of a campfire. And it was neat. It's neat just being able to hang out with so many people, really, after I had been up there doing that solo thing. But yeah, after I got out of that area, the next thing I was going to do was go up to Conundrum Hot Springs, that's south of Aspen. And so I backpacked up there, and I wound up talking with several people that were up there, up in the hot spring. So yeah, that was kind of neat up there, because I had a mix of time where there were several people around to talk to. Then spent the evening with, it was just like a couple of guys up there, and then after a while they went to their campsite, so I had the hot spring to myself, the kind of the late evening, just all to myself, nothing but me and the stars overhead and the shooting stars, up at like whatever, it's like, I think it's like 11 something thousand feet up there. It's about at timberline. That was just an amazing experience being up there. You're up in the mountains in basically winter season by then. There's snow around. You're nice and warm in this hot water, just in this like what basically is a harsh mountain environment up there. And it was just so warm, and just, I don't know, it was amazing. It was just truly a really wonderful, unique experience. You just kind of feel like you just occupy this weird place in the universe where, I don't know, you just have the stars overhead, big mountains around you with snow on them, and there you are, just like, with no clothes on in a hot spring, just this pool of just so warm and wonderfully inviting water. It's amazing. It's heavenly. But anyway, so, I had people to talk with there. And then on the way out, on my way back home, I had to get to. I actually had to hike out pretty early from Conundrum Hot Springs so I could get to Boulder in time for an event that I was going to with the EF Education First pro cycling team. They were doing kind of a thank you event thing that weekend to show their appreciation for fans that had basically chipped in and like donated money to help keep the bike team from going under the previous year. So I was able to go to that. I missed the group ride things because I was busy doing other stuff, but it just so turned out that I was in Colorado for that weekend when they had that, and I was able to get to the dinner. That was the final part of it. And that was really awesome because some of the riders were there. Alex Howes was there. Taylor Finney was there. I saw Joe Dombrowski walk in. I saw him walk in. I'm sure it was him, but then I never saw him again. So I don't know if he just didn't stay at all. But Jonathan Bonners was there, and he talked and kind of talking about the whole story about how the team got saved and how people donating money helped them land the new sponsor, the Education First sponsor. But I wound up having beers and talking with Alex Howes for quite a while that evening, which was a lot of fun. And Alex likes to get out and canoe and camp in the wilderness and stuff. So it was fun talking with him. And we were kind of joking about doing some sort of survival challenge where you have to just survive with what you have, you can carry on your bike or something like that. He was talking about how he and his wife had gone up to Alaska. I don't know if it was that summer or maybe a summer before. Talking about that a little bit, and also talking about going on these canoe trips where one of them he apparently didn't bring as much food as he was supposed to have packed. I don't know how that happened, but that was interesting. But anyway, it was a lot of fun talking with a guy, number one, who's a pro cyclist, but also a guy that likes getting out and doing wilderness type stuff. It was a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean that was my trip. I went out to, basically the whole reason that trip got planned was to go out and be all by myself up in the mountains, and I wound up talking with a whole bunch of people. So anyway, that's my video about kind of my thoughts about my Alone in the Elk Range challenge experience. Definitely meant a lot to me. I now have a little bit different, a little bit better perspective as to what some of those contestants on Alone are going through, at least to a certain extent. The type of stuff that that perspective you just don't get unless you've kind of gone out and done something similar. But yeah, I mean, I remember Dave Whipple said that, who was on Alone season 3, I think, season 4. Remember him kind of talking about going out and doing that sort of thing. And he said, if you go out and you do this type of experience, it'll change you. And I think that, I think it has changed me. I mean, it doesn't really change you necessarily in earth-shattering ways, but I've learned things. I've learned how, that experience really did teach me how rough it is to really be alone. It's one thing to be alone for short periods of time when you want to be. It's another thing to be alone kind of when you have to be. It's not easy on you. And just other little things I kind of picked up that, it kind of takes an experience like that to kind of teach them to you. Just kind of being out there and being out in kind of the quiet, just you and nature, the wilderness, and when you kind of become a part of that, and when you're kind of living not really on your own time but on wilderness's time, that sort of thing. Very, very special experience. And yeah, I mean, it's like he said, there's really not very many people that have had that sort of an experience. And yeah, it's definitely very special. And yeah, I mean, I came out of the other end of that, a little bit different. Yeah. I think maybe I was kind of looking for some sort of earth-shattering change, and I don't think that happened. But yeah, definitely, I feel differently about certain things. And I'll be honest, I'm out here camping by myself this weekend, and and I'll be honest, I'm out here camping by myself for a few days, and I felt kind of lonely out here. And I kind of wonder if part of it isn't, you know, kind of coming from my experience being alone up in the Elk Range mountains by myself for those few days. I kind of almost wonder if that's why I have this kind of more of a lonelier feeling. And I'm not saying that I think that experience kind of ruined me and that I don't want to go solo camping anymore. I'm not saying that at all, but I think I'm very much more well aware now that it's not always that great to be all by yourself. That's why family and friends, significant others, that's why they're so important. They really are. Even when you're an introvert that likes spending time by themselves and kind of needs that alone time to recharge your batteries, that sort of thing. Even when you're like that, which I am, you still need other people, very, very, very much so. So I suppose, that might almost be one of the, if you're looking for a lesson to get from the whole alone show and experience, that sort of thing, maybe that's it. Human beings aren't supposed to be alone. We don't do that good a job at it for very long. But anyway, I think I'll wrap this up. I think I've rambled on long enough. If you haven't watched my Alone in the Elk Range series, be sure to do that. I'll put a little link over, the little card thingy or whatever here. Watch those videos. I think it was a neat experience. But anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts on that experience. If you're new to my channel, I'd love it if you would subscribe and hit the bell so you'll get notified when I post future videos. If you like the video, hit like, share it with somebody if you think they'd be interested. And until next time, I'm Gareth with Mountain Coffee Outdoors. I'll see you then.